Hi, good afternoon. I'm Billy Collins, and thank you. Thank you. I feel I should make some transitional statement. I'm not sure what. That was quite enjoyable and revealing. I have the traditional pink shirt of the poet, but you don't know what I'm wearing underneath. So the theme, and I've really enjoyed the whole seminar. The theme has been sports, obviously, and a couple of days ago, Saturday, I guess, or Friday, I read a whole bunch of sports poems, not by me, but by others. I really haven't written any sports poems. I've written a couple of poems about not playing sports. But I'm going to read some new poems and then some poems from my books, and I'm going to start with a poem called Walking My 75-Year-Old Dog. She's painfully slow, so I often have to stop and wait for her to study and sniff some roadside weeds as if she were reading the biography of a famous dog. And she's not a pretty sight anymore, dragging one of her hind legs, her coat too matted to brush or comb, and a snout white as a marshmallow. We usually walk down a disused road that runs along the edge of a lake whose surface trembles in a high wind and is slow to ice over as the months grow cold. We don't walk very far before she sits down on her worn haunches and looks up at me with her rheumy eyes. Then it's time to carry her back to the car. I keep thinking about the honesty in her eyes, and I realize I should tell you that she's really not 75. She's 14. I guess I was trying to appeal to your sense of the bizarre, the curiosities of the sideshow. I mean, who really cares about another person's dog? Everything else I've said is true, except the part about her being 14. I mean, she's old, but not that old, and it's not nice to divulge the true age of a lady. Thank you. Have you ever heard the Tennessee fainting goats? You can see them do their thing, if that's what it's called, on YouTube, and all I'll tell you is the Tennessee fainting goats fulfill all three parts of their names. A little poem called Down on the Farm. Whenever the conversation turns to the subject of Tennessee fainting goats, the question that always comes up is why? Are they so squeamish that they faint like Victorian ladies whenever the farmer uses language unbecoming a gentleman? Or is it catching, one goat fainting because he sees another one fainting? But that still leaves open the question of what made the first goat faint. Does the memory of having keeled over one morning make one want to keel over again? Are they in love? Or is it all just too much? No one seems to know for sure, but it's something to think about when I'm trying to get to sleep at night, or when I'm looking out the window at the barn and the fenced-in pastures beyond. To see a goat stiffen before pitching over on its side with a thump is truly unnerving. But when he rises in a minute or two, as if from the dead, and goes back to munching with his head down in the sweet grass on these hillsides, then everything seems okay again, just like before. Thank you. The only odd poem in this, the only odd word in this poem is the word snood. And some of you know that's a sort of a hairnet, right? Used to be used by ladies, now often used by young gentlemen as a fashion. I don't think they know it's called a snood. I'm sure they wouldn't wear it, maybe. They'd think twice, perhaps. And the poem is called Safe Travels. Every time Gulliver travels, into another chapter of Gulliver's Travels, I marvel at how well-traveled he is, despite his incurable gullibility. I don't enjoy traveling anymore because, for instance, I still don't know the difference between a bloke and a chap. And I'm embarrassed whenever I have to hold out a palm of loose coins to a cashier as if I were feeding a pigeon in the park. Like Proust, I see only trouble in store if I leave my room, which is not lined with cork, only sheets of wallpaper featuring orange flowers and little green vines. Of course, anytime I want, I can travel in my imagination, but only as far as Toronto, where some graduate students with goatees and snoods are translating my poems into Canadian. Thank you. Thank you. This poem came about when I was reading, speaking of the Elizabeth Bishop house here in Key West. Two poems in Elizabeth Bishop's collected poems facing each other. One poem is titled Sleeping on the Ceiling, and the other poem is called Sleeping Standing Up. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just do a more conventional version of that. And I wrote a poem called Sleeping on My Side. And it's a sonnet, or it turned into a sonnet. Sleeping on my side. Every night, no matter where I am, when I lie down, I turn my back on half the world. At home, it's the East I ignore, with its theaters and silverware, as I face the adventurous West. But when I'm out on the road, in some hotel's room 213 or 402, I could be pointed anywhere, yet I hardly care, as long as you are there, facing the other way. So we are defended in all degrees, and my left ear is pressing down, as if listening for hoofbeats in the ground. Just looking here for a minute. Here's a poem called 1960. In the old joke, the marriage counselor tells the couple who never talks anymore to go to a jazz club, because at a jazz club, everyone talks during the bass solo. But of course, no one just starts talking because of a bass solo, or any other solo for that matter. The quieter bass solo just reveals the people in the club who have been talking all along. The same ones you can hear on some well-known recordings. Bill Evans, for example, who is opening a new door into the piano while some guy chats up his date at one of the little tables in the back. I have listened to that album so many times, I can anticipate the moment of his drunken laugh, as if it were a strange note in the tune. And so, anonymous man, you have become part of my listening, your romance, a romance lost in the past, and a reminder somehow that each member of that trio has died since then, and maybe so have you, and sadly, maybe she. Thank you. I'm an only child. And you probably, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but some of you kind of self-identify pretty quickly, or some of us, I should say. And at the book signing after this, if you are an only child, there'll be a special line. Because you deserve it. So in this poem, I am addressing that condition. Only child. I never wished for a sibling, boy or girl. Center of the universe, I had the back of my parents' car all to myself. I could look out one window, then slide over to the other window without any quibbling over territorial rights. And whenever I played a game on the floor of my bedroom, it was always my turn. Not until my parents entered their 90s did I long for a sister, a nurse I named Mary, who worked in a hospital 5 minutes away from their house and who would drop everything, even a thermometer, whenever I called. Be there in a jiff and on my way were two of her favorite expressions. And now that the parents are dead, I wish I could meet Mary for coffee every now and then at that Italian place with the blue awning, where we would sit and reminisce even on rainy days. I would gaze into her green eyes and see my parents, my mother looking out of Mary's right eye and my father staring out of her left, which would remind me of what an odd duck I was as a child, a little prince and a loner who would break off from his gang of friends on a Saturday and find a hedge to hide behind. And I would tell Mary all about that too, and never embarrass her by asking about her non-existence. And maybe we would have another espresso and a pastry, and I would always pay the bill and walk her home. It's a poem called Jet Lag, which somebody might be suffering from still. Jet lag, you're neither here nor there, or both here and there at once. You have dual citizenship, but you can speak neither language. It's one of 2 days, though you can't just take your pick. If you had a third foot, it would be solidly in the grave. A hangover without the party, a concussion without the blow. It has you under its skin, a voice that repeats nothing in your ear. Too tired to find a museum, too shaky to fall asleep. You go to bed after breakfast and wake up ready for anything in the dark. And bless you. And here's a very short poem called Bad Hotel. Bad Hotel. I told the woman from housekeeping who was eager to do my room to just come in and pretend I'm not here, which is exactly what I had been doing ever since I checked in. And here's a poem called, it's called Me First. And it's addressing something that, I think we all think about this, and even though we don't really want to think about this, the question is who goes first? A friend of mine used to stay awake at night wondering which Everly brother would go first. And so here's the poem called Me First. We often fly in the sky together, and yet we're always okay. There's our luggage now waiting for us on the carousel. And we drive lots of places in all manner of hectic traffic, yet here we are, pulling in the driveway again. So many opportunities to die together, but no meteor has hit our house. No tornado has lifted us into its funnel. The odds say then that one of us will go before the other, like heading off into a heavy snowstorm, leaving the other one behind to stand in the kitchen or lie on the bed under the fan. So why not let me, the older one, go first? I don't want to see you everywhere as I wait for the snow to stop before setting out with a crooked stick calling your name. Thank you. And this is a very short poem called Children. There's a new movie out titled Children. I don't know who is in it or what it's about, but I like it when the ad comes on the radio and the voice says, "Children, now playing everywhere. And here's a poem called Up Early, as in the morning, up early. Staring out at this immensity of salt water, I begin to feel like a second cousin of Achilles, or more likely, the son-in-law of an out-forgotten butcher of antiquity. That is, until you bop me on the back of the head with the Times, knocking my Maui Jims off my face, then kissed me good morning, reminded me of the glory that is now. Thanks. This is a little bit, I think this is kind of an only child type poem. And, in almost all poetry, the poet's alone, isn't he, or she? It's called Mice. I was normally alone in my childhood, a condition that gave me time to observe the activities of the many mice that had infested our house one winter night when the house next door burnt to a crisp. They all ran across the snow-covered lawn to find places to hide in their new home. Then later they discovered the kitchen, which was like Columbus discovering America, because the kitchen was already there. I became their only spectator, like someone alone in a movie house. I could even tell some of them apart, but resisted giving them names, afraid they would all disappear if our house happened to burst into flames. Oh, anonymous companions appearing in a hole in the wall, always scurrying out of my reach. So many hours I would watch your comings and goings before someone called me in to dinner. You were the beginning of cinema for me, and one of the reasons I am the way I am this morning, an elderly child with a tummy full of oatmeal and a mouse on my shoulder, standing on its hind legs, whispering in my ear. And keeping track here. A poem called Cheerios, speaking of early in the morning. Cheerios. One bright morning in a restaurant in Chicago, as I waited for my eggs and toast, I opened the Tribune only to discover that I was the same age as Cheerios. Indeed, I was a few months older than Cheerios, for today the newspaper announced was the 70th birthday of Cheerios, or as mine had occurred earlier in the year. Already I could hear them whispering behind my stooped and threadbare back, "Why, that dude's older than Cheerios." The way they used to say, "Why, that's as old as the hills." Only the hills are much older than Cheerios or any American breakfast cereal, and more noble and enduring are the hills, I surmised, as a bar of sunlight illuminated my orange juice. And here's a poem about talking to a teenager. That difficult act. Someone said, never cheer up a teenager. Never try to cheer. They just get more miserable when you try. So here's an adult addressing a teenager. It's called To My Favorite 17-Year-Old High School Girl. Do you realize that if you had started building the Parthenon on the day you were born, you'd be all done in only one more year? Of course, you couldn't have done that alone, so never mind. You're fine just as you are. You are loved for simply being yourself. But did you know that at your age, Judy Garland was pulling down $150,000 a picture? Joan of Arc was leading the French army to victory, and Blaise Pascal had cleaned up his room? No, wait, he's the one who invented the calculator. Of course, there will be time for all that later in your life, after you come out of your room and begin to blossom, or at least pick up all your socks. For some reason, I keep remembering that Lady Jane Grey was Queen of England when she was only 15, but then she was beheaded, so never mind her as a role model. But a few centuries later, when he was your age, Franz Schubert was doing the dishes for his family, but that did not keep him from composing 2 symphonies, 4 operas, and 2 complete masses as a youngster. But of course, that was in Austria at the height of romantic lyricism, not here in the suburbs of Cleveland. Frankly, who cares if Annie Oakley was a crack shot at 15, or if Maria Callas debuted as Tosca at 17? We think you are special by just being you, playing with your food and staring into space. By the way, I lied about Schubert doing the dishes, but that doesn't mean he never helped out around the house. That sounded like a bullseye. 29. Well, I'm keeping tabs here. Okay, time for a couple more. Here's an older poem, but it still has some traction. It's called Forgetfulness, and it really is sort of a essay in poetry about, or meditation on forgetfulness. And it starts out by talking about literary amnesia, forgetting stuff you've read. Forgetfulness. The name of the author is the first to go, followed obediently by the title, the plot, the heartbreaking conclusion, the entire novel, which suddenly becomes one you have never read, never even heard of. It is as if one by one the memories you used to harbor decided to retire to the southern hemisphere of the brain, to a little fishing village where there are no phones. Long ago you kissed the names of the 9 muses goodbye, and you watched the quadratic equation pack its bag. And even now, as you memorize the order of the planets, something else is slipping away. A state flower, perhaps. The address of an uncle, the capital of Paraguay. Whatever it is you are struggling to remember, it is not poised on the tip of your tongue, not even lurking in some obscure corner of your spleen. It has floated away down a dark mythological river whose name begins with an L, as far as you can recall. Well, on your own way to oblivion, where you will join those who have forgotten how to swim and how to ride a bicycle. No wonder you rise in the middle of the night to look up the date of a famous battle in a book on war. No wonder the moon in the window seems to have drifted out of a love poem that you used to know by heart. Thank you. Thank you. And here's a poem. I do write haiku. I like to write haiku. I actually can have time to read you just a couple of my haiku. I do all guaranteed 17-syllable haiku. Here's one I wrote in Alaska. The halibut boats leaving the harbor at dawn. Glad I'm not on one. Here's another one. So many nicknames for you, but none as lovely as marijuana. And then this rather sad one. Midwinter evening, alone at the sushi bar, just me and this eel. So I'll finish with a poem that I was going to start to read, a poem about a haiku. And it comes in sort of 3-line stanzas, so it has a haiku look to it. And thank you all for coming and for your attention. And the poem is called Japan. Today I passed the time reading a favorite haiku, saying the few words over and over. It feels like eating the same small, perfect grape again and again. I walk through the house reciting it and leave its letters falling through the air of every room. I stand by the big silence of the piano and say it. I say it in front of a painting of the sea. I tap out its rhythm on an empty shelf. I listen to myself saying it, then I say it without listening, then I hear it without saying it. And when the dog looks up at me, I kneel down on the floor and whisper it into each of his long white ears. It's the one about the 1-ton temple bell with the moth sleeping on its surface. And every time I say it, I feel the excruciating pressure of the moth on the surface of the iron bell. When I say it at the window, the bell is the world, and I am the moth resting there. When I say it into the mirror, I am the heavy bell, and the moth is life with its papery wings. And later, when I say it to you in the dark, you are the bell, and I am the tongue of the bell, ringing you, and the moth has flown from its line and moves like a hinge in the air above our bed. Thank you.